Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Intentional Guy. I am stoked about today's podcast, just simply because I know there's a lot of us who we have a story. We have a story of maybe addictions or other things in our life. And I believe today will be a great time for you to, especially if you're seeking for restoration and freedom from that, and maybe the guilt and shame that comes along with it. So today, I have a special guest with me, Ed Treat. He is Center of Addiction and Faith, if I'm correct, counseling. Um, I'm glad that you're here with us today, Ed, because this is something that a lot of times we as a church, we don't talk about. We don't talk about addictions and other things out there. And we also have a way of labeling people. I don't really like, I rather God label me than somebody else label me, but the truth of the matter is we all have a story, right? Sometimes it's not pretty. Sometimes it's not look great. But the nice thing about it is what the enemy meant for evil, God means for good. And God can take our story and make beauty out of ashes, and I'm seeing that in my own life. So today, Ed, I thank you for coming on here. And I just kind of want to hand it over to you. I ask you if you'd share a little bit of your story with us today.
Sure, I'd be glad to do that. Thanks for having me on. I'm honored. I loved your graphic at the beginning of the show. That's good. I don't know if you did that, but pretty cool.
Thank you.
I grew up in a military family. My dad was just a really angry man. He had a tough childhood and life, and he got beaten a lot when he was growing up, and so that's all he knew. And so he did that with us. We had 6 boys and 2 girls, a Catholic family, and so Dad would come home from military, and we never knew what was going to come through the door. He could come in happy and charming, or he would be swinging a belt. And more often than not, it was swinging a belt because military is kind of a rough environment.
Right.
Yeah. So so I grew up in that constant fear of impending doom. There was this sense that I was going to get in trouble for something, and I never knew what it would be. There was never clear rules around that. It was just it had to do with whether he was angry or not.
Oh, wow.
So he'd take it out on us, and I was far down the pecking order. So there was 6 boys, 2 girls in my family, and so the way that got played out is that he was hardest on the older ones, and they would pass it down to us, and there was a pecking order. And the way my siblings would take it out on each other is through sarcasm and shame, guilt, and humiliation. They would just find flaws in each other and picked on each other. My mom insisted we be nice, but we found mean ways to be nice. And so there was a lot of teasing, a lot of shaming, and so I grew up in kind of a soup of fear and shame, guilt, all of that. And when I was 13, 14 years old, I had my first drink of alcohol. And I can't even tell you how wonderful it was. It was just the best thing I'd ever experienced. It just warmed me from the inside out. And I didn't know that feeling existed. And I was set free from all that shame, fear, and guilt and all that stuff. It fixed all my problems. And so I didn't set out to be an addict or an alcoholic. I just knew that alcohol fixed me, and if it was around, I wanted some. And I also made sure I was around it if it was possible. So I started using drugs. I started drinking. I went to all the parties. I held parties. By the time I got to high school, I was that kid that parents didn't want you hanging out with. I ran wild, and I had long hair, and so I'm glad, I had those glasses that turned dark in the light and
Right.
and transitions, and so I always had looked like sunglasses on, and I had hippie shirts, and I was stoned all the time. I had drugs, or I knew where to get them, and my nickname in high school was Woodstock.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, party guy. And so I barely made it through high school. I moved to Maui. I moved to San Diego. And wherever I moved to, I would create a mess because I was just really irresponsible and just using drugs and partying as much as I could afford to. And So I would make a mess of my life, and it would get so bad that my best option was just to move, to run away. And so we call that a geographical move, geographical solution to life's problems. When things get bad, you just leave and start over somewhere else. And I just make a mess in the next place, San Diego, and then I was in Phoenix. And throughout those years, there were many times that I would hit bottom and just feel really a sense of desperation, like something was really wrong and I needed to fix it. And I would think, what do I do? I would always think I should go to church. And I would go to church, sit in the back, sit through a service, and then I would walk out going, well, that's not it. Maybe it's a different church. And I would try a different church, or I would just give up. But I never found what I was looking for. I never found any kind of connection, or I felt like that was kind of a place where I belonged. In fact, I didn't feel any sense of belonging there at all.
Wow.
And so, so that my life kind of went on that way. Didn't go anywhere for years until age 27. My brother had gone off to treatment, and he took my mom to his treatment center for family. Family. They try to educate the family. And so my mom got an education. She learned about addiction, alcoholism. And so she began to confront me and ask me how my drinking was all the time. I hated that question. I knew something was wrong with me. I knew that there was something seriously wrong with me. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't think it was drugs and alcohol. In fact, I was sure it wasn't. I thought if I could fix whatever's wrong with me, then I would drink and use normally. I just didn't want it to be that, because that was the thing that worked for me. It was my friend.
Right.
I mean, you can go to counseling, you can take antidepressants. They may or may not work. They take a long time, or they may not work that well, but opioids work really quickly. And opioids actually model the feeling of love. I mean, that's the sensation you get from opioids is very similar to the feeling of being in love. And who doesn't want to feel love?
Right.
And so that's why it's so highly addictive. And alcohol does that too. And so, and it's instant. If I have a drink, I'll feel better in about 20 minutes. So it's fast acting and effective. But it over time will take its toll, and that's what it had done to me. So by the time I was 27, I phoned home and I asked for help, and my mom said, "Well, we'll come and get you." And then she went to an Al-Anon meeting, and they said, "No, don't go get him. Find him a treatment center." And so she called me back the next day and said, "We're not going to rescue you. We've got a treatment center for you." So I went in, and even to the day I went into treatment, I didn't think this was my problem. I thought I still had something else wrong with me, but I was just to the point where I was willing to try it. And immediately the lights went on. I read the big book and I watched some videotapes, and I went, "Oh my gosh, this explains everything. This is my problem." And ever since then, that was 1986, I've been free. And but it was also the beginning of my journey to find my life again, because I'd gotten so far away from who I was. When I was younger, they used to say, if you drink drugs, use it out. If you drink and use drugs, it will stunt your growth. We used to laugh at that. We thought it was a joke. But what I realized was I was 27 years old, and I had stopped growing emotionally when I started using and drinking. So here I was, a 27-year-old man with the emotions of a 13-year-old. And so I had to go. So when we talk about recovery, we're talking about learning how to grow up and be a human being, and learning how to deal with your emotions and not let your emotions overwhelm you. And it's really hard to do, to stand in the face of life and life's demands and not want to run away, because drugs is really a way of running away. It's just a way of hiding out. And so I started the long, hard process of recovery, and slowly started to get my life back. I went back to college, got a degree, and went off to seminary. And in my recovery years, the years that I'm getting my life back in order, there were many times that I thought to myself, I want to deepen my spirituality, because 12-step programs really essentially are about spirituality. I mean, the language is about getting right with God and praying and prayer and meditation, and carrying the message to others who still suffer. And so it's really the 12 steps are really a liturgy for the Christian life. You know, trusting God entirely, complete surrender, examining your life, confessing your sins, making amends to other people, cleaning up your past, deepening your spirituality, and then going out to help others. I mean, that's the liturgy of the Christian life is what we're called to do. And so, but I would go to 12-step meetings, and I've always been. My brother got me to my first 12-step meeting, and I remember being terrified because I was afraid I'd see somebody I knew, and I was worried that they would think I was one of that I belonged there.
Right.
And because it's pretty humiliating. There's a lot of stigma, and so I was terrified. And then I realized they were going to ask me to share, and that scared me even more because I thought I don't know how to talk. I can't talk like these people are talking. I was really amazed by what I was hearing. I mean, these were some of the most beat up, hurting-looking people. They just look like it is. We often jokingly say 12-step meetings are a lot like the Star Wars bar. You remember with all the creatures?
Yes.
So we jokingly say that, but here they were sharing one at a time, and they were funny, they were charming, they were they just spoke from their hearts, and I just thought, how are they doing that? That's just amazing to me. I would love to be able to do that, but I was so buried under my masks that I had been wearing for so many years that I had no idea how to be myself. And I think I was terrified that if anybody saw the real me, they would be horrified.
Yeah.
So I was so deep into hiding that I couldn't be myself. I didn't know how to do that, but I was really drawn to it, I'll tell you. And then, so I made 12-step meetings my home, got very involved. And then I would get to the point where I'd want to deepen my spirituality. And so I would think, well, where do you go to get closer with God? Well, you go to church, right? So I would try churches, and I would church hop, and I church hopped like I bar hopped. I would try different ones, and I would leave every one of them. I would leave going, no, that's not it. I mean, there's nothing here that connects with me and with what I'm going through in life. And my perception is that church is a place you go to when everything's going well. I mean, when you got your, what I saw were people that had their life together, and many of them did. I don't know that all of them did, but I just didn't fit in. I was a broken human being, and these people just seemed like they were all together. So I just never could find a connection. I finally gave up and decided that 12-step groups were going to be my church, even though I didn't really feel like it was enough. There was not enough theology there that satisfied me. But so trying to edit myself because you don't want to hear every detail, but there was during my spring break at college, a friend from the program, another alcoholic, and I said, let's go find God in the wilderness. And so we got out a map of the state of Washington, which is where my dad retired to, and I kind of grew up there.
Right.
We got out a map of the state of Washington, and we said, where would we find God? And so we saw this big green section of the map. It was the North Cascades National Park. And we thought there's no roads going in there. And it's like, that's where God is in the middle of the wilderness. So we said, how do we get in there? And the best way to get in there was to get on a boat in the town of Chelan, Washington. And it takes you 3 hours up this really long, skinny lake and drops you off at Stehekin, small town that's really nothing more than a lodge. There's a fishing lodge and a restaurant. And it's in the middle of nowhere. And they drop you off and pick you up 3 days later. So we said, that's where we're going to go find God. So we get on this boat and we're chugging up the lake. And then the boat stops and picks up about 50 people. And we were like, oh my God, we didn't want all these people going there. How are we going to find God if there's other people around? We need wilderness and isolation. But so these people get on, and I'm talking to them. And I said, are you guys going to Stehekin? And they said, no, we're going to a place called Holden Village. And I was like, what's Holden Village? And they said, well, it's a Lutheran camp up in the mountains. It's an old mining camp that's been converted into an adult retreat center. And my first thought was, oh, great, I'm on a boatload of happy Christians, right? And it wasn't until later that I found out that Lutherans really aren't all that happy. They're not very expressive in their faith. So one of them said, well, show them the flyer. And one lady pulled out of her purse this crinkled up flyer, and she opened it up. And they were going up to Holden Village for a 12-step weekend workshop.
Huh.
And so I'm like, I'm trying to get as far from civilization as possible. And I'm on a boatload of people going for a 12-step work. These are all people in recovery. And they're going to this church camp to talk about recovery. And I just thought, we went to find God in the wilderness. And, it's funny how God works, isn't it?
Isn't it?
So we decided to go with them. We went to Holden Village. It's a Lutheran camp, and it's just an amazing place. It's so remote that you have to take the boat up the lake. That's the only way there. And then you get on this old rickety school bus, and it takes you up switchbacks and 12 miles back into the Cascade Mountains. And here's this little town. It used to be a mining town, and families would live there. And it was a copper mine. And they sold it after it went out of business. They sold it to the church, and they operated it as an adult retreat center. And here I was in a church and talking about the 12 steps. It was like, wow, it's like coming home. I found my home. And I thought, these Lutherans are okay. What I really loved was that they had a theology of what's called a theology of the cross, which means that God meets us in those hard, dark, scary places. And the expectation is that God, God, life is hard, and we go through some really awful things, but God is there in the midst of all the things we struggle with. So we don't have to pretend like because we believe in Jesus, we can sail off and live happily ever after. Because we live in Jesus, we can go through really hard and dark places with confidence and assurance. And to me, that felt a little more genuine theologically. That I didn't have to pretend to be this happy Christian and say praise the Lord at the end of every sentence, right?
Yep.
So I fell in love with the Lutherans. I volunteered at that camp. I got involved. I was their bus driver and their sound audio visual guy. And then that summer I met my wife. She was there from Minneapolis visiting, and she and I fell in love, and we ended up getting married. And decided to go to seminary, and went to Lutheran Seminary to deepen my understanding of God, to know the Bible better, and to grow in my spirituality. And about 3 months into seminary, I came home to my wife and I said, I've made a huge mistake. I said, the Lutheran Church is not like Holden Village at all. I said, it's just like every other church. They're not talking about any of this, and they don't want to talk about it. And I was just really disappointed. And they're not talking about spirituality. It's just all academic. It's just all book stuff. It's all head stuff.
Right.
And so I was just really, really bothered by that. And I was going through a crisis of whether I should stay or not. But then I heard there were these pastors getting together in Chicago, and they were Lutheran pastors, and they were alcoholics. And so they were meeting, and I thought, I got to go there. And so I drove to Chicago and came into this meeting, and here these guys were, and they were telling their first step stories about, how they drank and ended up in the gutter. And I was like, these are my people. They know how to be broken, and they know how to be real. And anyway, so it was really exciting for me, and I felt renewed in my call to be a pastor. And so we formed a group called the Fellowship of Recovering Lutheran Clergy. And back in 1990, when that group formed, pastors were if you had the problem of addiction and you were a pastor, that was it. You were done.
Yes.
You were, we say, taken behind the barn and shot or thrown to the curb. Right.
Right.
And so we said, wait a minute, this is a health issue. Why are we destroying people's lives because they have a health issue? That, pilots, doctors, nurses all have organizations that help them stay in their careers. We should be doing the same thing. So we became a group to advocate for pastors to stay in recovery. And so that group formed 30 years ago, and I've been the director of it for the last 18 years. And we do a variety of things. We've written a policy for helping pastors stay in the ministry if they become addicted. And we have written a book that tells our stories. We do an annual conference and a retreat. So I've been doing that for a while. It's a small shoestring operation, but we're there for those people that most need the help and support. We have a 12-step meeting that meets online every week. Pastors from all over the country and Canada come and find support there.
And what addictions do you guys deal with?
Oh, everything. We've got alcohol, drugs, eating disorders, workaholism, codependency, sex addiction, which is really hard for a pastor. That's one that doesn't find much acceptance in the culture. If you're a pastor and you have a sex addiction, that's not good.
And restoration is almost impossible to find from that.
Right. You just can't. I mean, you can come out as an alcoholic these days, and it's not that big of a deal. But you can't come out as a sex addict because there's so much shame and stigma attached to that. And the crazy part is sex addiction is rampant. I mean, it's
ever since the internet came out, it has exploded.
Oh gosh, and I mean, we're watching Viagra commercials in regular daytime TV. You know, I mean, how crazy is that? I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, it's just like we're obsessed with sex in this country. Anyway,
yeah. Well,
so yeah,
go ahead. Well, I love that part that you're not just a drug addiction, but you're looking at all these different addictions, because, you know, part of my story was a sexual addiction, and coming from where I came from, I didn't know where to turn. And I did turn to a group that I thought would be great. And when I got in there, I found out how condemning and legalistic they were. That drew me even further into my addiction, you know? And so I know how hard it is as a minister who falls into an addiction and then feels so alone, because the minister's always helping the other people. But then when the minister needs help, where does he go?
Right.
You know, so I commend this ministry because it's so needed. They need a place where they don't feel like their world has just completely gone, and find hope.
Well, it is a career that has a high incidence of addiction, and that's not been acknowledged. But by the nature of it, it is the people that go into the ministry. Typically, just because you want to go in the ministry usually is an indication that you've got something wrong that you're trying to fix. And so you know, we think, you know, if we go in and help others with problems, that ours will get fixed, but it doesn't quite work that way.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah. So I was doing the FRLC stuff until about 2017, when the opioid crisis really began to blow up. And I went to an event at University of Minnesota, and I heard Amy Klobuchar, the senator from Minnesota, to speak about how everything they're doing is making the problem worse. She said, what we can do is change the laws, and we can make it harder for people to get opioids. But that just means now they're going to the street and they're getting opioids in other ways. And our opioids are poisoned. I mean, you don't know if you're on the street, you don't know if you're getting opioids or fentanyl.
Right.
And so that's why so many people are, you know, it's actually getting worse. And so she said, we need everyone to do something. We're running out of ideas. And so I had this epiphany, and I thought, I know that I know that seminary doesn't teach about addiction. And I know that my fellow clergy have no clue about the addictive process and how it works. And you said a minute ago about how you appreciate that it's about all these different addictions. Because what I insist is that, or what I teach and believe, is that we all have addiction to some degree. I mean, we're just by human nature, it's part of who we are. It's, you know, in Genesis, when Adam and Eve ate the thing that they weren't supposed to do, ate the fruit they weren't supposed to eat, they immediately became ashamed and hid themselves. Right. And so in my faith tradition, at the beginning of worship service, we have this corporate confession that we say, and we stand up together and say the words, we confess we are in bondage to sin and cannot free ourselves. And so we're essentially saying, God, we keep saying and doing and thinking things that we don't want to, but we can't stop. And that's a statement of addiction right there. And so we're all addicted to some degree. It's just that for some people, it's worse.
Right.
And I would suggest, and I would put forth that underneath every addiction, there is unresolved pain.
Yeah.
Because we think of addicts and people using as bad people doing a bad thing, but it's really hurting people trying to relieve pain. And so whether it's food, whether it's work, whether it's exercise, whether it's pornography, whether it's alcohol or opioids, it's you're trying to medicate. You're
Yep.
medicating pain. And
Well, and I like
and
what you
so
said earlier. You said that drugs, and that's how pornography and stuff was for me, was it produced a false sense of love,
yeah,
and
yeah,
and belonging, or I don't know
yeah,
how it works in our mind completely, but
yeah,
it feels like it's meeting a need that it's really making worse.
yeah. Well, and you get that huge endorphin rush, with an orgasm. That's
Yep.
pretty awesome. It's hard not to want to do that
Right.
as much as you're capable of it. It's our, part of our human design.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just said we need to educate clergy and faith communities to do a better job, because I had this vision that there's a church on every street corner in this country. And if they all began to learn about this and do some things to try to help, people like me who come in looking for help can walk away with a brochure or at least something to help them learn about what they're dealing with. And so I felt like we need to get churches involved. And
Yeah.
so this is when we started the Center of Addiction and Faith. We don't do counseling. Well, how the Center of Addiction and Faith got started was we held a conference. Basically, we had no plans to start a business or a new ministry. We just wanted to hold a conference, bring together the brightest minds around the science and the study of addiction, and educate our fellow clergy. And so we put on this conference, and we thought maybe we'd get 30, 40 local pastors to come if we were lucky. By the time we got done promoting it and putting it on, we had to cut off registration at 200.
Mm.
And we had pastors from 34 different states, one from Canada. They represented 17 different denominations. And so we were like, wow, we've really hit on something here.
Yes.
There's a lot of interest. So we did it again in 2019. We had the similar result. We had a huge turnout. We had people from all over the country come. We had lots of denominations represented. So after that, all my colleagues and people in my life began to say, you need to make this into a ministry of some kind. And so I said, yeah, I know, but I have a job. I was a senior pastor of a large church. And I thought, I can't do both of these things. They're just too much. But I felt the calling. And so I tried to put together a ministry, and I did that for about a year and a half before I realized I couldn't do both, because my church required attention.
Right.
And so I kept saying, God, provide the resources I need so I can go do this other thing. And what I heard back from God was, no, go do the other thing. We'll figure out the resources later.
Don't you love that answer?
Yeah, I love that answer. Yeah, so I took a step of faith. I resigned from my call and about 2 years ago, and formed a 501c3 called the Center of Addiction and Faith, and our mission is to awaken faith communities to address addiction.
Wow.
And so we're a prophetic voice nationwide, and what we're trying to do is tell faith communities they have an obligation to deal with this. People are dying. Huge numbers of people, young people are dying, more than COVID. And yet, where's the response? And we also know a lot about addiction now. There's incredible science, and yet we're still functioning with information from 50 years ago. I mean, we still treat it as though it's a moral failing when it's really a health problem.
Yeah.
And there's some solutions. And so anyway, we need to, we have a retired pediatrician on our board, and he's saying doctors aren't educated either. They get nothing on addiction, maybe a class somewhere along the way, but they still think of people coming in looking for drugs as dirty addicts instead of people who have a health issue, which is what they should be evaluated. If they're coming in drug seeking, they shouldn't be shooed out the door. They should be evaluated and sent off for help.
Yep.
Anyway, so we have a lot of work to do. So, we do our annual conference. We started doing monthly webinars where we, like you do, host people from all over the country and people working in this field that know a lot. and have these really great webinars. And after the webinars, we have these great conversations. We have a discussion group. We get 200 to 300 people coming to our webinars every month, and it's really been wonderful. I do a podcast where I interview pastors who tell their story, called My Story of Addiction and Grace, and you can find it on your Spotify or whatever music program you have access to.
And we'll put it in our description.
Okay,
too, so
good.
People can find that.
Yeah, they're inspirational. You hear about what it's like for a pastor who ends up, with a serious drinking problem. We've got one story about a bishop who just got elected to be bishop, and 2 weeks into his new job as bishop, was confronted by his staff. They did an intervention. He went off to treatment, and he came back and continued to serve as bishop, and tells an amazing story of his recovery. But
yeah, and the unfortunate thing, so my group of churches that I come from, they would have been thrown away. That minister would have been confronted, and that was what I grew up. I remember when there was a pastor who had an affair. My dad got a phone call from another pastor, and as any good teenager did or young person did, I was eavesdropping on the phone, and I heard him say, "Bless God, another bad pastor gone." And that put me into hiding, because what my family didn't know was I had been sexually abused, and I didn't feel like I could go to anyone, and therefore that's what I learned as an adult unresolved trauma needs to be dealt with. And I didn't know why I did the things I did until I got into counseling and all that other stuff, but that's one of the issues is we, as ministers, there's a big fear of being thrown away. And then, they're looking at their livelihood and their everything else going on. There's all these fears associated with. And I feel like the church just sticks our heads in the ground, and we talk about saved by grace a lot, but we really are talking about on a performance-based faith more than we are anything else. And we don't allow that our ministers are humans as well, capable of anything anybody else is capable
probably more so because of the pressure they're under to be perfect.
Yep.
And when you repress, your human frailties, they come out somehow. That's why, sometimes you see people railing against something like sexuality. It turns out they've got this secret sex life. It's
no, you're exactly right.
Yeah.
So.
And it's amazing how those unresolved traumas and those unresolved issues will drive your life. And you don't even know that's what's doing it, but those things that they take on a life of themselves, and they can really create trouble for you.
They can. And like you said, in your early days, you were going to churches looking for a place to belong. And I believe a lot of there's, when I was in the midst of mine, I could not there was no safe place that I knew of that I could go to and seek help. It did not exist. And then once I finally got restoration, it took me 15 years. Been a 15-year journey for me to find it, because I had to go outside of the circle that I was from and go to a totally different state. And I see God all along the way where he was, but he had to remove me to show me who he was. And thank God he's faithful. He brought the right people into my life that helped me find restoration and all that, but now today I'm one of those persons. I love what you're doing, because had I known about your organization, had that available to me during that time, how much hardship or how far, I don't even know how long would it have taken me, to find that
Yep.
hope.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, that's what we want to do is start catching those people before they kill themselves, or they don't have to go as far as they do. Actually,
Yes.
they're finding that prevention is pretty effective. There's a lot of things we can do that are preventative. Education for one. I mean, if we
Right.
understood the addictive process and understood the science behind it, that helps people realize they're having a problem way before. I mean, like in my case, I thought something was wrong with me. I didn't know what it was,
Yeah.
and then when I got the education, it was like, oh my gosh, this explains it.
Yep.
Well, the problem is that we don't get that education until we land in treatment. I mean, it's way late. And so
Yep.
if that treatment happens earlier in life, the time between you having a problem and getting help gets shorter,
Yep.
and it's effective. It works.
And I came from from a group that if you stick your hand in the sand, stick your head in the sand, then it'll eventually go away. Just trust God. Just trust God.
Yes, that's right.
And I needed some people to be Jesus with skin on and love
Yeah,
me in
yeah,
the midst of this,
yeah,
but I didn't know where that existed
yeah.
to that level.
Well, that's funny because your religion can even become part of your denial system. I mean, that was
Yeah.
true for me because of what I believed. I really believed in God. I told you that my brother took me to my first AA meeting. And I remember thinking, it's too bad these people don't know the Lord like I do. I, I thought I don't need this because I have Jesus. And somehow that, knowing Jesus was going to fix all my problems. Well, Jesus was bringing me to the place I needed help. I didn't want it. What I
Mhm.
wanted was I wanted a lightning bolt to, strike
Yes.
me and fix me. I
Yes.
didn't want to have to go through 12-step group for crying out loud.
I
But it
I
turns
had
out it was the best thing I could have wanted. Better than I could have hoped for. I mean, because the 12-step fellowship is phenomenal. I mean, the people they're the most genuine people in the world, and I get to be one of them.
the best thing and the worst thing that I ever did was went to Sexaholics Anonymous.
Mm,
And I remember the shame and guilt on me. But as I heard their stories, because they did a newcomers meeting that night when I
yeah,
was there, and they shared their stories. So for people who don't know what that's like, and they went around and told their stories. As they told their stories, I saw me in each of their story,
yeah, yeah,
and then I didn't feel so alone.
yeah,
But I remember when I would say, "Hey, I'm Mike. I'm a sexaholic." How hard those words were
it is.
to
It's
come
hard.
out, but I was so used to is this my identity, you know?
Yeah,
And, um, but me, I was, when I first went, I don't need to go around all these perverts and all this stuff. That's not
yeah,
me.
yeah. Right, right.
And then when I got in there, I felt I did belong,
Yeah,
and what
yeah,
great men in the community these guys were
yeah,
because
yeah,
they were doctors and
yeah,
lawyers
yeah,
and every
yeah,
aspect of life. But man, how for several years these men poured into me, became my sponsor
yeah,
and helped me. I'll
yeah,
I'll never
yeah.
forget them for what they did.
It's what I think Jesus intended for the church.
Yeah.
And it's really unfortunate. The church of all places is the last place people want to share their hurts.
And the church was the last place I wanted anyone to know I was a part of Sexaholics
Right.
Anonymous.
Oh God. Yeah. I mean, when I was doing my internship as a, learning pastor, I heard I heard that one of our ushers was a member of Al-Anon. So I went over to him. I said, "Hey, I'm a friend of Bill W's, which is code for I'm an alcoholic." And he said, "Oh, that's awesome." And so we started talking. We had this instant connection, which recovering people do. And so we had this great conversation. And then I said, "Hey, would you ever share your story during Lent? Maybe give a testimony?" And he looked horrified. He said, "I would never share that part of my life at church." And I just thought, what is wrong with the church that people can't share their hurts?
Yeah.
But it dawned on me during seminary, I had an insight into maybe why the church is not a place for broken people. It happened during a class on Christian education. We were learning how to teach the faith. And this teacher was teaching on the parables, and he's teaching how to teach the parables. And he was talking about the parable of the prodigal son. And I was going, oh, I love that story. That's my story. The kid who goes off and wastes his life with loose living and then is welcome back. That's my story. And then the teacher says, but the story isn't about the son who goes off and gets forgiven. The story is about the older brother who won't accept him back. And Jesus was telling that story to hold up a mirror to the Pharisees and saying, see what you're like? I'm trying to help these poor people that are broken and want to get right with God. And you're just stonewalling them and not letting them in. And so when I heard that, I thought, oh my gosh, that's huge. That's a big deal. And I raised my hand and I said, how many in this class relate to the younger brother and how many relate to the older brother? And there was only 2 of us in the class that related to the younger brother. The rest of the class, these were all pastors learning to be pastors. And I thought, well, of course the church is that way then. I mean, if they all relate to the older brother, that means they're like the older brother. They've done everything right their whole lives. They've lived by the rules. They've earned their place, in Dad's in Dad's good sight. And so they're just nothing but bitter about this son who comes in and just gets everything forgiven. It's not fair. And I understand that. It isn't fair. It isn't fair, this older brother is having to deal with. So I get it. But I thought the church is made up of older brother types.
Yeah.
So no wonder broken people like us don't feel welcome there.
Exactly.
Because we're really not.
I wrote a book 2 years ago on my life, my story, and I didn't want to write it. And I was like, and I didn't intend to write it. But then here I did write a book about my life. And I was like, God, the biggest fear that I had was being exposed. And God said, well, then we're going to take care of that. And I'm going to control the narrative of it. And so my book is called Expose. But that was my biggest fear, was I didn't want anyone to know. But let me tell you, once I sent that off, that's when freedom came.
Yeah.
Because God put light on my story, and now I could own my story, and I don't hide from my story anymore.
Yeah.
I share my story because God's not ashamed of me.
Yeah, that's right.
But I get to live that.
Yeah.
And
isn't that the whole, that's the whole Genesis story again. It's just like everybody's living in hiding to some degree.
Yeah.
I mean, even the older brother is thinking and saying and doing things he's not proud of, and he doesn't want anybody to know. So we're all in hiding to some degree. And the nice thing about you and I is that we've had this problem that forced us to come out of hiding, and we found a freedom that that most people don't get to feel.
Yeah, because I understand now that the verse that talks about, his grace is sufficient for me, and how in my infirmities I can glory in God, or whatever, where I just butchered that. But I understand that completely now, because I'll be honest, had I not gone through what I did, I don't think I ever had this freedom in my life.
Right.
So when my world fell apart, I felt like it was the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
But it was actually the best thing that could have ever happened to me.
Yeah.
And yes, I lost a lot from it, but I've gained so much more too.
Yeah. And that's pretty scriptural too. I mean, in weakness we find strength, and it's not this. God doesn't play by the same rules as the world does.
Correct. Isn't that great?
Yes. Well, I always heard these people say, I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic, and I would go, oh, give me a break. It's like, how can you be grateful for that? But then it dawned on me one day, it's like, I get to live a life today that I think is what Scripture promises. And if I didn't have this disease, I probably never would have found it.
Yeah. And I have a lot of friends who are miserable in life, who haven't gone through the addiction like that I know of. But also they don't have the joy in their life like I have. but because they're still bound to legalism and some other stuff
Yeah.
in their life, and so, I'm thankful. I'm thankful for what I've gone through. I'm thankful for men like you who are brave enough not to hide anymore and will share their stories, so that, like, guys who are listening to us right now who might be, I mean, there's many ministers that listen to this that might be sitting there living with something that they're afraid they can't
Yeah.
share with someone.
Yeah.
But if they don't, it's going to destroy
Yeah. That's our
more than what
secrets.
they realize, because
Secrets are deadly. Yeah.
they are. And so, I want to make sure I put in the descriptions, links to your podcasts, your websites, to your ministry out there. And I commend you for it, because
Thank you.
it's such a great thing. I wish it was something that I knew of when I was going through mine, because I remember being so lost
Yeah.
and seeking. Thank God for a minister that was hundreds of miles away from me, named Mike Collins, that
Mm.
would embrace me and love me in spite of me, and showed me Jesus with skin on, and walked
Man.
this journey through me, even when I betrayed him and fell and relapsed. He was still there,
Yep.
you know? And so, um, and I want to thank you for being on our show today. And as we close off, is there any last words you'd like to maybe say to someone out there that's listening that might really need what we're talking about today?
Yeah. No, I really appreciate the opportunity to share my story. I know that it enriches me as much as it might enrich somebody else. But if there is someone out there hurting, and you're wondering what's going on, find a 12-step group of some kind and just walk in and listen, and you're going to hear some things. It's to say it depends on what you're struggling with, but we have 12-step meetings that have every kind of addiction in it, and it doesn't matter. It's the same language. It's
Yep.
we're all struggling with the same thing. We're all in hiding, and 12-step places is 12-step groups are a place you can come out of hiding and you can be yourself, and you'll be loved and welcomed and accepted, which is what
Yeah.
we're all really looking for.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for being here. And to my listeners, until next time, just keep being intentional. We'll see you next
Thanks,
week.
Michael. God bless.
Thank you.